The geopolitical landscape is witnessing a profound recalibration, with China at the nexus of shifting global dynamics, navigating complex regional conflicts, solidifying strategic partnerships, and fiercely pursuing technological self-reliance. From its measured response to the escalating Israel-Iran tensions to the subtle yet significant evolution of its alliance with Russia and a renewed domestic push for tech independence, Beijing is meticulously charting a course designed to reshape the international order and secure its long-term interests in an increasingly volatile world. The recent escalation of conflict between Israel and Iran, punctuated by the U.S. bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities, has sent ripples across the globe, prompting Beijing to emphasize de-escalation. Chinese President Xi Jinping, in a June 19 call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, articulated China's core concern, stating unequivocally, "If the Middle East is unstable, the world will not be at peace." He urged warring parties, particularly Israel, to cease fire as soon as possible to prevent a cycle of escalation and resolutely avoid the spillover of the war. This stance reflects China's consistent policy of rhetorical rather than material support for Iran despite their strong economic ties. Experts like Andrea Gazzelli of the University of Exeter note that Iran desires concrete help like anti-aircraft systems or fighter jets, but China is unlikely to offer more than communiques and declarations. This aligns with China's historical policy of non-interference, as highlighted by William Figueroa, an assistant professor of international relations at the University of Groningen. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have both confirmed no signs of Chinese military support to Iran at this moment in time. China's ambassador to the United Nations, Fu Song, condemned the U.S. attacks on Iran as a violation of the UN Charter and international law, while China, alongside Russia and Pakistan, tabled a draft UN Security Council resolution for an immediate ceasefire, though it is likely to be vetoed by the U.S. Beijing has been harshly critical of Israel, with Foreign Minister Wang Yi explicitly condemning Israel's violation of Iran's sovereignty. This diplomatic response aims to lower the temperature, particularly in its delicate relationship with the U.S., as suggested by Figueroa. Beijing's aspirations to be a global peacebroker, notably after mediating the Saudi Arabia-Iran truce in 2023, face a tougher test in the Israel-Iran conflict. Israel has shown no interest in China as a neutral conciliator, a perception complicated by China's strong economic ties with Iran, its largest trading partner and a critical lifeline against U.S. sanctions. Iran's inclusion in BRICS in 2024 and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in 2023, along with a 25-year cooperative agreement signed in 2021, underscore this deepening relationship. While China also maintains an innovative, comprehensive partnership with Israel, its influence over Israeli actions is deemed insufficient by Figueroa. Failure to facilitate peace could dampen China's global peacebroker image, especially after Ukraine rejected its 2023 peace plan. Economically, China's dependence on Middle Eastern oil is significant, with over 40% of its crude oil imports originating from the region, while Iran itself is a replaceable energy partner for global oil markets. The potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil trade passes, would severely impact China. This mutual dependence could be leveraged by the U.S. to urge China to dissuade Iran from further escalation. Intriguingly, some analysts, including Bloomberg economics analyst Alex Koksharov, suggest that a contained Middle East conflict might benefit China by distracting Washington from its strategic competition with Beijing, potentially allowing China to increase pressure on Taiwan. This strategic alignment with Russia, characterized as a political friendship rather than a classical alliance, is central to China's vision of a multipolar world. While Russia is often seen as the junior partner, this relationship allows both countries strategic autonomy and the ability to test international norms without strict obligations. Both nations advocate for a UN-centered global order. Yet their approaches and priorities within the UN often diverge. In the context of the Ukraine war, their voting records at the UN Security Council reveal the limits of their friendship. Russia has repeatedly vetoed resolutions condemning its actions, while China has consistently abstained, emphasizing respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and advocating for peace.
This highlights China's comprehensive engagement with UN institutions compared to Russia's narrower focus on the UNSC.
Divergences are also evident in their African policies, where China prioritizes development and international cooperation, promoting the African Union's role, while Russia pursues more protectionist and opportunistic goals, often shielding its allies from scrutiny and focusing on military supply routes. On UN reform, a critical litmus test for their ideological alignment, China supported the Pact for the Future to reform veto power and representation, while Russia opposed it,
leading to a significant ideological non-alignment.
Despite these differences, China and Russia have successfully transformed BRICS, expanding its membership and boosting its global recognition. Through logrolling, they have intensified cooperation on less contentious policy initiatives like climate change, where BRICS members have converged on opposing green trade barriers like the European carbon border adjustment mechanisms, thereby creating an alternative platform to pressure developed countries. Complementing its geopolitical maneuvering, China is fundamentally recalibrating its domestic tech strategy, a move prominently signaled by an extensive and unprecedented interview with Huawei founder Ren Zhengfei on the front page of the People's Daily. This high-profile platform, typically reserved for top party officials, underscores a new bargain. Private enterprise is now seen as essential to China's technological future, especially in countering stringent U.S. export controls on advanced chips and AI tools.
Ren's defiant tone.
Acknowledging Huawei's chip lag but insisting on progress through mathematics supplementing physics and clustered computing has become a scientific nationalist call to arms. His emphasis on lonely innovators and Huawei's significant investment, a third of its $25 billion R&D budget, in basic research with no immediate commercial payoff, highlights a long-term vision for technological self-reliance. This shift signifies a pivot from the regulatory crackdowns of 2021, which chilled the private tech sector, to a new era of state-guided entrepreneurship. Huawei, as a national champion, enjoys symbiotic ties with the state, receiving capital contracts and protection, distinguishing it from Silicon Valley's freewheeling capitalism. The timing of Ren's interview also coincides with China's strategic embrace of generative AI, galvanized by the rise of domestic large language models like DeepSeek, which are approaching GPT-4 performance levels.
China's AI strategy blends state guidance, private ingenuity,
and open-source collaboration, creating an ecosystem for rapid scaling. This growing emphasis on scientific sovereignty and science nationalism echoes historical precedents such as Deng Xiaoping's 1978 Science and Technology Conference, aiming to consolidate authority and foster public unity amid economic slowdowns and global decoupling. While the People's Daily headline, "The more open a country is, the more it drives us to progress," projects an image of openness, it exists in tension with China's tightly regulated information economy and restrictive AI laws. Ren's remarks serve as a strategic rejoinder to U.S. export controls, asserting that sanctions may slow but cannot derail China's technological ascent, as evidenced by Huawei's resumed 5G phone production and domestic AI chip investments.
For the U.S., the takeaway is clear: competition, not isolation, is key to staying ahead. America's historical strengths, openness to talent, ideas, and risk-taking, must be leveraged, recognizing that scientific progress is global and cannot be contained by walls. In essence, China's multifaceted approach, from its cautious diplomacy in the Middle East to its pragmatic partnership with Russia and its renewed push for technological independence, reflects a comprehensive strategy to navigate and ultimately shape a multipolar world. The fragile new normal between the U.S. and China is characterized by rivalry and interdependence, competition and occasional cooperation. The ultimate test for both global powers will be their capacity to build open, resilient and continuously innovative systems rather than engaging in self-defeating isolation. Beijing's current actions suggest a long-term commitment to this vision, poised to continue influencing global governance, economic stability and technological innovation for years to come. The global economic landscape is currently navigating a tempest of trade tensions, as nations grapple with the far-reaching implications of protectionist policies and geopolitical shifts.
What began as a series of targeted duties has evolved into a complex web of reciprocal tariffs, supply chain realignments, and diplomatic maneuvering, leaving businesses, consumers, and even national economies in a state of heightened uncertainty. Recent developments underscore this new normal, from a dramatic decline in U.S. agricultural exports to China to a widening array of tariffs impacting everything from household appliances to luxury goods, all against a backdrop of escalating geopolitical conflicts. A stark illustration of this evolving dynamic comes from the agricultural sector, where U.S. farmers face a tough outlook. China's imports of a diverse basket of American farm products plummeted by over 43% year-on-year in May, according to Chinese customs data. Shipments of fresh boneless beef and edible sorghum from the U.S. tumbled more than 97%. While corn and uncombed cotton yarn saw declines exceeding 93% and 94% respectively. This dramatic drop is a direct consequence of the ongoing U.S.-China tariff war, which saw Beijing impose 10 to 15% tariffs on U.S. agricultural goods in early March, escalating to over 100% in April before a temporary trade truce in mid-May. Experts like Mia Nilamimadi of the South China Morning Post suggest that this trade may never fully recover, as Beijing's strategic moves to diversify its food supplies are proving difficult to unwind. This shift, driven by long-term uncertainty in U.S.-China relations, carries deep implications for global supply chains and particularly for the U.S. farm sector, which has historically relied heavily on the Chinese market. Beyond agriculture, the ripple effects of President Trump's tariff regime are being felt across diverse industries and economies. The administration's Liberation Day tariffs, set to lapse their pause on July 9, threaten to impose even higher duties on a broader range of imports. Starting this week, tariffs will directly affect household items such as washing machines, fridges, and ovens, potentially leading to higher prices for American consumers. This concern is echoed by Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who, while holding interest rates steady, acknowledged that the Fed is beginning to see some effects of tariffs and expects more of them over the coming months. He noted that the pass-through of tariffs to consumer price inflation is a whole process that's very uncertain, indicating a lack of clear data on how these costs are distributed across manufacturers, exporters, importers, retailers, and consumers. Indeed, U.S. consumers are already expressing increased pessimism about rising prices fueled by tariffs, as indicated by a TransUnion report. The tariff pressures are also manifesting in corporate earnings and operational strategies. German car manufacturers, for instance, incurred an estimated $535 million in costs in April alone due to U.S. tariffs, while Japan's Mitsubishi Motors has announced a 2.1% average price hike on new U.S. vehicles, passing the burden directly to consumers. Even the toy industry is not immune, with Hasbro, the maker of Monopoly, cutting 3% of its workforce due to higher tariff costs on toys imported from China. The impact extends to critical infrastructure, with the bankruptcy of home goods retailer At Home explicitly attributed to the volatility of the current tariff environment and the uncertainty it created for planning key seasonal orders, given its significant reliance on Chinese sourcing. Conversely, some companies are seeking buffers. Amazon, for example, is reportedly focusing on luxury goods to offset tariff impacts for Prime Day. Manufacturers in countries like South Korea have rushed shipments to the U.S. ahead of tariff deadlines, highlighting the frantic pace of global trade adjustments. The strategic re-evaluation of global supply chains is particularly evident in Southeast Asia. Vietnam, a major beneficiary of the China Plus One strategy, which saw companies diversify manufacturing away from China to circumvent U.S. tariffs, now finds its own success story threatened. Credendo, a trade credit insurance agency, highlights that Vietnam's economic model, deeply tied to both the U.S. and China, is vulnerable. With the U.S. administration now cracking down on Chinese goods circumventing tariffs through false certificates of origin, Vietnam faces the dual challenge of direct U.S. import tariffs, initially threatened at an astronomical 46%, and pressures to reduce economic ties with China. This puts Hanoi's bamboo diplomacy of neutrality to the test, urging the country to further diversify its trade partners beyond its two largest markets. Geopolitical tensions further complicate the trade narrative. As the U.S. directly engages in the war between Israel and Iran, Beijing's support for Tehran has become more restrained. Despite a strategic partnership and China's reliance on Iranian oil via the Strait of Hormuz, Beijing appears to be calculating its moves carefully. While initially condemning Israel's attack on June 12, China's rhetoric has shifted, with Foreign Minister Wang Yi refraining from condemning Israel's strikes in a call with his Israeli counterpart, instead focusing on dialogue and a ceasefire.
Analysts suggest that Beijing,
embroiled in its own trade war with Washington, may perceive value in Middle Eastern chaos if it distracts the U.S. more than it hurts China. Some experts even posit that China might be happy to see a big spike in oil prices if that destabilizes the US and Europe, given its relatively better preparedness to absorb such a blow and access to alternative oil sources. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called on China to dissuade Iran from closing the Strait of Hormuz, a move China's foreign ministry has indicated is against the international community's shared interest, even as Iran's parliament backed the decision. Amidst these turbulent waters, diplomatic efforts to forge new trade agreements or mitigate existing tariff impacts continue, albeit with mixed success. The G7 summit in Canada saw President Trump signing a limited trade deal with the United Kingdom,
lowering tariffs on British car and aerospace imports. However, key issues like steel and aluminum tariffs remain unresolved, and other industries like pharmaceuticals were excluded.
Negotiations with the European Union and Japan, however, appear more protracted.
The EU now anticipates a 10% reciprocal tariff as a starting point for any US-EU deal, even as Trump threatens tariffs of up to 50% after July 9.
Similarly, Japan's efforts to persuade Trump to scrap a 25% tariff on Japanese cars and a 24% reciprocal tariff on other imports have stalled, with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba failing to reach an agreement at the G7. Canada too has threatened to hike tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum imports if a deal isn't reached, even as both Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney expressed optimism for future talks. The pervasive impact of these trade wars is undeniable, reshaping global supply chains, influencing corporate strategies, and adding layers of complexity to macroeconomic forecasts. From the plight of American farmers to the strategic dilemmas of Asian manufacturing hubs and the nuanced geopolitical calculations of major powers, the world economy is undergoing a profound transformation. The outcome of ongoing negotiations, the resilience of global supply chains, and the adaptability of businesses will determine the long-term economic landscape as the world grapples with a future where trade policy is increasingly intertwined with national security and geopolitical power plays. The intricate web of global geopolitics continues to tighten, with recent revelations shedding light on the dual-use nature of advanced technology and the complex diplomatic dance playing out on the
international stage. From allegations of a leading Chinese AI firm aiding military operations and circumventing sanctions to Beijing's nuanced stance on the escalating Middle East conflict, a clear picture emerges of a world grappling with technological supremacy, economic interdependence, and the ever-present specter of regional instability. At the forefront of these concerns is DeepSeek, a Hangzhou-based AI firm that sent ripples through the technology world earlier this year, with claims of its AI reasoning models matching or even surpassing U.S. industry leaders at a fraction of the cost. However, a senior U.S. official has now made explosive allegations, telling Reuters that DeepSeek is actively aiding China's military and intelligence operations and has sought to evade U.S. export controls on high-end semiconductors. This assessment, previously unreported, suggests DeepSeek has used Southeast Asian shell companies and sought remote access to data centers in the region to bypass restrictions on chips like NVIDIA's H100s. While an NVIDIA spokesman later clarified their review indicated DeepSeek used lawfully acquired H800 products, which were specifically introduced for Chinese consumers before further U.S. clamps, the core concern remains over the firm's alleged efforts to circumvent controls. Furthermore, the U.S. official claimed DeepSeek is sharing user information and statistics with Beijing's surveillance apparatus, leveraging Chinese law that mandates data provision to the government upon request.
This raises significant privacy concerns for DeepSeek's tens of millions of global users, particularly given past accusations from U.S. lawmakers about data transmission via back-end infrastructure connected to state-owned China Mobile. The silence from DeepSeek on these privacy practices only amplifies the unease within the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. These technological skirmishes are unfolding against a backdrop of heightened geopolitical tensions, notably the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran, which has drawn a cautious but firm response from Beijing.
Chinese President Xi Jinping,
in a recent call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, underscored China's deep concern, stating, "If the Middle East is unstable, the world will not be at peace." He urged an immediate ceasefire, emphasizing that further escalation would bring greater losses not only to the warring parties but also to regional countries. Both leaders, according to China's foreign ministry, strongly condemn Israel's actions, which violate the UN Charter and other norms of international law, and put forth a draft resolution to the UN Security Council calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. While this resolution, which condemns attacks on Iran's nuclear sites, is likely to face a U.S. veto, it highlights Beijing's rhetorical alignment with Tehran.
Indeed, China has positioned itself as a potential peacebroker, an ambition underscored by its launch of the International Organization for Mediation (IOM) last month and its success in brokering a historic truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran in 2023. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has stressed China's readiness to play a constructive role in resolving the current conflict. However, experts like William Figueroa, an assistant professor of international relations at the University of Groningen, suggest that Israel is unlikely to accept Beijing as a neutral conciliator. This skepticism stems from China's strong economic ties with Iran, its past criticisms of Israel, and the broader global power competition with the U.S., Israel's primary ally. Iran is China's largest trading partner and a critical oil supplier, having joined BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and signed a 25-year cooperative agreement with Beijing. While China also maintains significant economic ties with Israel, it's not close enough to have a serious influence over Israel's actions, according to Figueroa. The potential failure to broker peace in the Middle East could significantly undermine China's image as an effective global peacebroker, especially after Ukraine rejected its peace plan in 2023. The economic ramifications of the Middle East conflict are also a major concern for Beijing.
While China is the largest importer of Iranian oil, analysts suggest Iran is a replaceable energy partner for global markets, with OPEC plus spare capacity potentially offsetting any loss of Iranian exports. The true economic threat lies in the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil trade passes. Iran has threatened to close this vital choke point, a move that would severely impact China given that over 40% of its crude oil imports originate from the Middle East. As Iranian lawmaker Ali Yazdika warned, if the United States officially and operationally enters the war, it is the legitimate right of Iran to disrupt their oil trade's ease of transit. For China, already grappling with domestic economic growth challenges exacerbated by the trade war with the U.S. and a real estate crisis, surging commodity prices from a disrupted oil supply would be disastrous. This mutual dependence offers the U.S. leverage, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio urging China to advise Iran against closing the strait.
Paradoxically, some analysts suggest that a contained Middle East conflict, while economically risky, could serve China's broader strategic interests. As Bloomberg economics analyst Alex Kocherov noted, a prolonged conflict could distract Washington from strategic competition with China. Alan Wan, Bloomberg's bureau chief in China, elaborated that if the U.S. becomes tangled up in a war in the Middle East, that'd probably suit China just fine, potentially allowing Beijing and the People's Liberation Army the chance to squeeze Taiwan tighter. Moreover, analysts like Sarah Hagdusty of Win Without War believe both China and Russia are content to watch the U.S. further squander goodwill with Gulf Arab partners and deplete its stocks of missile defense interceptors.
The allegations against DeepSeek and China's strategic maneuvering in the Middle East underscore a rapidly evolving global landscape where technological prowess, economic leverage, and geopolitical influence are inextricably linked. As the US continues to tighten its grip on critical technologies to prevent their use by strategic rivals, and as China seeks to project its influence as a global leader while safeguarding its economic interests, the delicate balance of power will continue to be tested. The coming months will reveal whether these escalating tensions lead to further fragmentation of global supply chains and a more overt division of geopolitical blocs, or if a path towards de-escalation and a more stable albeit fiercely competitive international order can be forged.